Look at this. A 15-second handshake between the two most powerful men on the planet, two nuclear states, a 145% tariff war just sitting lightly in the background, the first American president to stand in Beijing in nearly a decade, the eyes of every government analyst, every geopolitical strategist, and every diplomat on Earth fixed on this single moment. What does the internet give you? Xi flipped the power dynamics. Trump's handshake reveals submission. This single gesture tells us everything about who controls this relationship. Bollocks. And I want to show you why almost everything you were told about that moment is, at best, a confident guess, and at worst, the kind of misleading that actually matters, because it really shapes how people understand real geopolitical relationships between real nuclear powers. My name is Ben Cardle. I'm a private investigator. I've written 2 best-selling books on applied behavioral reasoning, and I spend my life working and training law enforcement and intelligence professionals and organizations from around the world in behavioral analysis. Not the YouTube version, the version where getting it wrong has consequences. So this series exists because the gap between what body language content claims and what the science actually supports is vast, embarrassingly vast. And this is what we're doing here. All right? Stay with me. Before we go any further, I want to tell you what the series actually is, because to me it's kind of important, and that might just be to me, of course, but we'll see as the series elapses. There is a category of content that does something genuinely harmful under the cover of sounding authoritative. It takes a real scientific field, like the study of nonverbal behavior, and it flattens it into something that feels satisfying and means almost nothing. You've seen it, someone slows down a video of a world leader, they point at a micro expression and they say with total confidence, there it is, it's contempt. They explain that crossed arms is a signal for defensiveness, that eye direction reveals deception, that a specific head tilt tells you when someone is lying. The reason this content gets millions of views is not because it's accurate. It's because it feels accurate. Because the human brain is a prediction machine. Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2 processing documents it clearly. Our fast, automatic thinking generates plausible sounding conclusions with extraordinary fluency. So when someone points at footage and gives you a clean answer, your brain rewards you for the resolution of uncertainty. It feels like understanding. And that feeling is big fat not the same as being accurate. The researcher Vincent Deneau has documented this problem systematically. His work examines the gap between what the empirical literature on nonverbal behavior actually shows and what gets taught and broadcast under that name. He is not fringe. He's doing what intellectually honest researchers in any field are supposed to do. Read the evidence and then report it accurately. And shock horror, I agree, loudly. The micro-expression detection industry, or whatever it's called, in particular is something we can use. The claim that trained observers can reliably detect concealed emotions from brief facial twitches and use that as some kind of deception indicator is not supported by the evidence in the way that it's presented to the public. The research is complex, it's contested, and it has been significantly overstated. Anyone presenting it as settled science while skipping over those problems is either not working in the field or just not being honest about what the field says. There is no third option that I've been able to find yet. So what are the actual analytical frameworks, and why do they produce different conclusions? What you'll be able to do differently by the end of this that you couldn't do at the start, right? So what is this series? Each episode will take a high-profile public piece of footage that's already been chewed over by the pop psychology machine, and we'll run it through the frameworks. The frameworks specifically that are grounded in the actual science of human movement, emotion, and communication. Named scientists, named studies, peer-reviewed where it exists, and most importantly, honest. Every time. about the limits of what you can and cannot conclude from what you observe. When I'm making an inference, I'll tell you it's an inference. When the evidence doesn't support a clean conclusion, I'll tell you that as well. Now, it's not hedging. That's just the difference between analysis and storytelling with a video. So, before we look at a single frame of the footage, I need to give you the thing that most of this kind of content just skips past. Mostly because it's inconvenient for the kind of content they're making and is decidedly less about the intellectual sex appeal that it comes with, you know? Context. The magical C word. Context is king. It's not a soft point. Context isn't background noise. Context is the entire interpretive frame. You strip it, you're not doing analysis. You're just decorating a conclusion that you've already got. Think of it this way. If I show you someone's hand trembling slightly and tell you it means that they are anxious, it sounds pretty reasonable, right? But what if they had 4 espressos that morning? What if they've got an essential tremor? What if they'd been in the gym an hour before? The behavior is real. The attribution is a choice. This is the baseline problem. In any behavioral reading worth doing, you need to understand what a person's normal looks like before you start calling deviations from it meaningful. Without that reference point, you're just pattern matching onto a different narrative that you already decided was true. You've all heard it. You all know what it is. This is confirmation bias. The tendency to interpret new information in a way that confirms what we already believe. It's not a flaw in stupid people. It's a feature of the cognitive structure of all of us. System 1 generates the story. System 2 is supposed to check it. Most body language content is just pure System 1. It's just a clean story with no checking, no review. A lot of the time, no thought. So what do we know about the Beijing context? This was the first American presidential visit to Beijing in nearly a decade. It's the 7th face-to-face meeting between Trump and Xi since 2017. The backdrop included active tariff negotiations, Taiwan tensions, Iran, and a broader question about whether the two countries were going to treat each other as strategic competitors or something more like reluctant partners. The event itself was a choreographed state welcome, military honor guard, flag-waving children, red carpets, the great hall of the people with Tiananmen Square behind them. Every element of that environment was chosen by the Chinese government, and it communicates something before a single bloody handshake happens, right? That's the most important thing in this section. A handshake between two heads of state at a staged diplomatic ceremony is not a candid moment. It's a performance. And regardless of what you want to believe, both parties know that. Both of them have advisors. Both operate in political cultures with specific protocols around physical proximity and contact. Both of them have been told what the other's handshake style is by their intelligence and their diplomatic teams. The behavior that you're seeing has been partially built in advance. Now, that doesn't make it meaningless. It just makes it differently meaningful. And a serious analyst has to account for that. So what's the cultural frame? Why would you apply a Western lens to this interaction? And how can that produce a bad analysis? That's the part that almost nobody in the coverage addressed. And it's arguably the most important contextual factor in the entire interaction. The United States and China, they don't just have different political systems. They operate from fundamentally different cultural orientations toward the relationship between the individual and the group. And those orientations show up directly in how people behave in formal settings. the psychologist, and I knew I was going to reference this guy, but I've never heard his name pronounced. So sue me if I get it wrong. Geert Hofstede spent decades developing a framework for mapping cultural dimensions across countries. His individualism, collectivism dimension, one of the most replicated findings in cross-cultural psychology. The United States consistently scores among the highest in the world on individualism. China consistently scores among the lowest because they are deep in the collectivist range. So what does that actually mean in practice? In individualist cultures, and the United States is a textbook example, personal expression in public is not just permitted, it's kind of expected. Warmth is performed visibly. Enthusiasm is communicated physically. The individual's emotional state is something you show, because showing it is how you build connection and trust. Trump's grip, his pull, his sustained eye contact, his broad physical engagement, they're not just personality traits. They are behaviors that make complete sense within an individualist cultural framework where physical dominance displays signal confidence and authority. In collectivist cultures, the logic runs a little differently. The group is the primary unit, not the individual. The face. And this isn't a metaphor. It's a sincere, genuine, operational, social concept with real consequences. Composure isn't emotional distance. It's social competence. It signals that you understand the weight of the moment and you're not going to make it about yourself. So think about what that means for Xi's behavior in this footage. His stillness, his formal containment, his refusal to reciprocate the warm gesture. Every commentator who read that as dominance, as a power move, as Xi winning the physical exchange, was applying an individualist cultural frame to a collectivist performance. So you're already on the back foot. They're reading a behavior that was calibrated for one cultural logic through the lens of a completely bloody different one. That's not analysis. That's assuming everyone in the room is playing the same game by the same rules. They are not. There's also the concept of mianzi. It's face in the Chinese social context, which operates as a genuine currency in formal interactions between high-status individuals. Mianzi is earned through restraint, through the appropriate calibration of public behavior to the seriousness of the occasion, through not being seen to perform for the cameras. Xi's composure in this ceremony is entirely consistent with someone who understands that his face, his social capital, his authority is demonstrated by not needing to perform. And this cuts the other way as well. Trump's attempt at a warm gesture, the double-handed clasp, the patting, it reads very differently in a Chinese cultural context compared to a Western one. In American political culture, that gesture is an attempt to signal personal warmth and engagement. In a formal Chinese ceremonial context, unsolicited physical contact from a foreign leader that goes beyond the standard greeting could read as a boundary being pushed, or simply as something unfamiliar. The gesture isn't universally warm. The warmth is culturally encoded. Now, that's in a bloody great big nutshell, that's the entire problem with treating body language as a universal language. It ain't. It's never has been. The claim has been refuted repeatedly in the cross-cultural literature. And it produces exactly this kind of error. A Western analyst applying Western behavioral norms, watching a cross-cultural interaction between two people operating from different cultural logics, and they're producing a verdict that confidently just misses the point. Now hold that frame. We are going to need it when we get to Xi's response in the footage. What we know about Trump's documented physical baseline with world leaders is as follows. He has a consistent, observable, cross-contextual pattern in physical interactions with other heads of state. He extends his handshakes what's the polite way? Beyond the social norm. He uses what commentators have called a alpha grip. Palm angled slightly downward at contact, often pulling the other person towards him, sometimes covering their hand with his free hand, sometimes using the prolonged grip to destabilize the other person's posture. He did it with Macron in 2017 for 28 seconds, with Shinzo, with Justin Trudeau, with multiple leaders at NATO summits. It's been documented across multiple contexts in multiple years. That makes it as close to a baseline behavior as we can establish without direct psychological assessment, which would be problematic. So when his behavior with she deviates from that pattern, and it does, clearly and meaningfully, the deviation is something worth examining. But the conversation has to start from the baseline, not from a conclusion somebody wrote before they watched the clip, or speaking from a position of somebody that just is happy to see someone fail. All right? Footage. We're going to run this footage in passes. Same approach every episode. First pass is observation only. What can you actually see? No interpretation, no meaning, just a description, like an inventory of sorts. Second pass, we look for deviations from what we know about the baseline. And then the third, we consider alternative explanations before we land on any inference at all. That's the part of the body language content that you're never shown. Not because it's boring, just because it's inconvenient. It complicates the clean story of a delicious YouTube article. This is only a short we're using, but I'm not going to play it through once because I don't want the BBC knocking down my door for some kind of copyright consideration. The link is included in the description, or I'll try and put it in one of those cards that go up here somewhere so you can find the exact thing and follow along if you want to. Watch it through once, and then we're going to cut back to the little bits that we can use here. So the first thing I want you to look at isn't the hands. It's never the hands first, not if you're doing it properly. It's the feet. The lower limb orientation is one of the most reliable non-verbal indicators that any trained observer can spot. And the reason, it's neurological. The lower body itself is further away from conscious self-monitoring than the face or the hands. We manage our expressions. We manage our gestures. Most of us don't manage where we're pointing our feet or what we're doing with our lower body. Not really because it doesn't occur to us, just because it's a facilitation of comfort in the way that we move, or the way that we intend to move. Like if you wanted to grab something from behind you, think of it this way. You want to grab something from behind you. Say I wanted to touch my Jeremy Brett picture for whatever reason. I would have to turn so far before I can't turn any further, and my hips, my legs, my knees, my feet would have to open up to facilitate my additional journey. So the logic indicates that we as an individual, if what I'm focused on here needs that much attention, then in order for me to turn, it's an afterthought, or I open it up with one leg to facilitate the movement coming back. Whereas if I'm free to move back because I know it's a quick gesture, or I know what I'm doing, or it's a quick fleeting moment of interest, I turn my entire body. It's the same thing here. It's parakinesics. Parakinesics, and it's the need to facilitate ease of motion, ease of movement. So before you look at anything else here, you look at their lower half. I want you to make your own call. Where are both men's feet pointed? Where are their hips pointed? Where are their knees pointed? Not in that it's some kind of mind-reading signal, but it's a signal of intent. Does either man's body orientation shift during the approach? Pause if you need to, but actually look. This isn't rhetorical. The skill is in the looking. It's not in the hearing me tell you what I saw, or hearing some other authority tell you what they saw. All right? So here's what we get. Trump's approach is direct. I know, you're all shocked. His torso is oriented towards she. You can see the shoulders facilitate that. You've got this kind of straight line here that facilitates the ease of an aging man pointing towards the way he wants to walk. There's no angular hedging. There's no slight turn away. There's no asymmetry in shoulder orientation suggesting some kind of partial withdrawal from the interaction. And let's not forget that they are all going to be turning this way here, because here are the cameras pointing at them, taking pictures. You can see that slight anticipation in the turning of the body of the shoulders here and here. Now, she's reception is square on, because the approach is a fully committed activity in its physical direction. She doesn't step towards Trump. He receives the approach from a planted position. Now, yes, we can't see the body, but we can see his clothes. We can see how much tension is in the clothes, and we would see those creases dip and change and move. So the physical intent is still here to facilitate that. But the hips, nothing going on in this lower half. All right? It's still focused on the point. It's still focused on what he's wanting to do. His weight appears evenly distributed. There's no visible forward lean into the greeting. So there is a kind of asymmetry. One person moving toward, one person stationary and receiving. It's information. In proxemics terms, who crosses the space to close the distance carries a social cost. Whether that cost is read as warmth or eagerness or something else depends on everything we've established in the context. The easiest argument to make is she's on home ground. He's the home team, baby. Trump crossed an ocean. The spatial dynamic in this greeting was decided before they reached the carpet or the stone stairs. Watch the palm orientation at the precise moment of contact. You see it? In Trump's documented pattern across multiple leaders, his right hand arrives with the palm angled slightly downward, a position that mechanically places his hand on top of the other person, if they don't actively counter it. It's a subtle thing, not dramatic, but it slightly shifts here. Slightly shifts. It's slightly more open. There's still the physical attempt to counter, but the palm is still up. There's still a slight Scorpion Mortal Kombat, get over here element to it, but she doesn't have any of it. It's not dramatic. But the grip very quickly then settles into the standard vertical palm-to-palm orientation. Neither man's hand is clearly on top in the first 2 seconds. There's already a deviation from Trump's pattern, where the geometry of dominance is typically established within the first second. Trump places his left hand over she's. He pats the back several times. The internet kind of reads this as there's a good boy. Daddy's home. It's a power move that failed. She winning the handshake. Right? Let me offer you a different picture of what it could mean in context. Because that's exactly where single behavior, single meaning analysis produces bad conclusions. So you've got the double hand clasp, the free hand covering the joined ones. It doesn't have a fixed meaning. In Western political and diplomatic contexts, it has historically signaled warmth, personal engagement, intimacy. It's the physical equivalent of leaning in. It communicates, I want you to feel that I'm personally invested in this interaction, not just formally present. But remember what we established about the cultural frame. In a collectivist context, the unsolicited physical contact, I know, given who we're dealing with, but any kind of touching that exceeds the standard greeting norm isn't automatically warm. It can be read as boundaries being tested, as unfamiliar. So the gesture carries one meaning in the cultural logic that it was produced from. It doesn't automatically carry that same meaning for the person receiving it across a very different cultural framework. So the category that's on the table is, does he have a game plan or not? Right? If we've got the two different logical frameworks, the choice to do this could be seen as the testing of the boundary to put this guy on the back foot. But in the very same breath, it could also just be an improvisation by someone whose usual approach isn't landing. That's something I can't tell you. And critically, neither can anyone else who wasn't inside his head at the exact moment. What I can tell you is that the reading of it as a submission requires selecting one possible meaning from a range of possible meanings, and selecting specifically the one that produces the most dramatic narrative. That's not an analysis. That's an editorial. There's a difference. The more analytically interesting question isn't what the gesture means in isolation. It's why this specific gesture appeared here with this specific person, when Trump's documented pattern with other leaders doesn't include it. The deviation is a signal. The meaning of the deviation, that's where we have to be careful. All right? So if you look at she is not matching the energy. You receives the interaction just without amplifying it. No reciprocal patting, no warmth gesture. He just stays formally composed throughout the full duration with a pleasant expression on his face. So what's the media framing? Oh, this guy, dominance. Here, no BS at all. Just because he stayed still while Trump did his warmth performance. Now apply what we established in the cultural context section. In a collectivist framework, in a formal ceremonial setting of the significance, composure isn't neutrality. It's just the appropriate register. It demonstrates that you understand the weight of this occasion. It protects face, między, by not subordinating a state-level diplomatic moment to a personal physical context or a personal physical contest. She's only being read as still through the Western logic. And through this Western individualist lens, he looks like he's withholding. Now, if you read this cultural framework that it was actually produced in, it looks like someone performing exactly as his cultural and political context demands. Those are completely different conclusions. They can't both be right. And the commentators who produced the "she won" narrative, they made their choice without acknowledging that the alternative framing existed. That's the error. It's not that it's not inherently that they chose one interpretation over the other. It's that they presented one interpretation as if no other interpretation was possible. There's also the Plutchik intensity point worth making. Robert Plutchik in his emotional intensity wheel. The same underlying emotional state presents very differently at different intensity levels. So what looks like calm composure could very easily just be low intensity satisfaction, or genuinely just nothing very much at all emotionally. The observable behavior doesn't resolve that ambiguity. Context and baseline narrow it, they don't eliminate it. And then there's the environment again. Yeah, this is she's home ground. She doesn't need to perform dominance in the physical interaction. The performance had already happened. The military honor guard, the choreographed arrival, the staging of the Great Hall, that was the power display. A head of state who controls all that doesn't need to win a handshake. The handshake is already happening inside a frame that he constructed. There is a dimension of movement analysis that most body language content ignores entirely. And it's not what someone does, but it's how they do it. It's the amplitude, it's how large the movement is, the velocity, as in how fast, the force behind it. We call it gestural volume in class. These are what the field calls parakinetic qualities. And they're so important because they are significantly harder to consciously manage than the movements themselves. A person can learn to maintain eye contact when anxious. They can learn to smile in the right moments. They can't easily learn to make their movements feel fluid and unhurried when they aren't. The quality of that movement bleeds through. All right? So watch Trump's patting motion specifically. I want you to make an assessment about the quality of that movement before I give you mine. Is it fluid? Is it rhythmic? Does it feel settled? Or does it feel like a movement that is searching for a landing place? My read? The patting motion has a quality that I'd describe as a managed deliberateness. It's not the fast twitch, impulsive quality of his aggressive pull with other leaders. It's slower, slightly, more considered, slightly. There is almost a rhythm to it. There wasn't enough pats to get a clear rhythm from it, but it's just not entirely settled. The number of pats is a slight variable, which in parakinetic terms suggests a movement that is monitoring its own outcome rather than executing from this clear internal intention. And there's a number of things that could mean. It could mean a conscious modulation of his usual approach, where Trump himself is aware of the weight of the world that's bearing down on him. That doesn't mean he cares. That doesn't mean he doesn't. Just being aware of it. A deliberate choice to present differently with Xi than with other leaders. It could mean genuine warmth. It could mean uncertainty about how to physically navigate an interaction with someone who's never responded to his usual physical signs in a predictable way. Xi has been, across multiple encounters, one of the few leaders in his orbit who doesn't visibly adjust to Trump's grip. For what it's worth, and this is only an inference, bear in mind, the movement quality reads like an accommodation, behaviorally speaking. It's an adjustment made in real time by someone whose default approach isn't landing the way it usually does. Now, whether that accommodation is strategic or instinctive or some proportion of both, I can't say. Nor can anyone else, bear in mind. Unless it's Trump himself or any of his team. What I can tell you is that the parakinetic read is more interesting than the grip geometry read. And almost nobody covered it. It's mostly because it's harder to explain in a headline now. This is arguably the most analytically useful moment in the whole interaction. The moment a grip releases, both parties have a fraction of a second before the public performance fully reasserts itself. The managed presentation just drops slightly, briefly, while the body orients. What happens in that gap? That's worth watching very carefully. Watch both men's eye direction and posture in the immediate moment after the hands separate. Where do their eyes go first? Does either man's posture change when the physical contact ends? Is there any visible shift in how they carry themselves once the grip is no longer an active thing they're managing? What do you reckon? What I want you to hold on to is the principle that the release is often more informative than the grip itself, because it's essentially the moment that the performance is the least managed. Build it into your own observational practice whenever you're watching interactions like this. So it's from here, straight to camera, and it ends slightly in this clip, so we don't exactly know which direction he's going to turn into. I'm sure there's more a more complete footage that we can use, but we know that there are cameras here taking the pictures because this video that we're watching is one of them. Right? So the formality of the event is something that this guy's clearly aware of. This guy, unless the coverage goes way over this way, he's got other things on his mind. What those things are, we don't know. And if the coverage of the cameras is a massive semicircle like this, then he himself over here is still just as aware of the formality of the event. The handshake's done, and it's like they've gone right into the next scene. The performance continues. Let's go back to the coverage of this, not the video, but the headline coverage of this, because we need to be specific about the errors, not to be difficult, but it's because the errors follow a pattern, and the pattern tells you something about how this category of content is produced. You got error 1, single behavior, single meaning. The entire power dynamics narrative, selecting one feature of the interaction, the double-handed clasp, and then assigning it a fixed meaning. That's what scientific literature calls a one-to-one correspondence. The assumption that behavior X reliably maps to meaning Y. The problem is that this doesn't hold empirically. The same gesture in different cultural contexts with different individuals and the different social conditions carries different meanings. The research on that ain't ambiguous. And specifically in this case, the cultural dimension was ignored almost universally. The United States sits at the individualist extreme of Hofstede's cultural dimensions model. China's at the collectivist end. Those aren't trivial differences in personality or preference. They are different operating systems for how public behavior is produced and read. Applying one to interpret the other and then presenting the result as objective analysis isn't a minor methodological oversight. It's the central mistake of the entire thing. Error 2, no baseline, no signal. A lesser-known Bob Marley song. To their credit, a small amount of the coverage compared this handshake to Trump's previous interactions. Most of them didn't. Most of them looked at a single moment in isolation and then just made definitive claims about what it revealed about the relationship between two men who've been meeting formally for 9 years. Without a baseline, you have no deviation. Without deviation, you have no signal. What you have is a snapshot. Think of it this way. How would you know that happiness exists if you don't have sadness to compare it to? You can tell any story you want about a snapshot if you don't have to account for the context that it was pulled from. Look at the infamous Prince William photo. And then error 3, Confidence calibrated to narrative, not evidence. That's the one that matters most. The research on human judgment under uncertainty is pretty unambiguous. We are not good at this. Humans, including trained professionals, perform at roughly chance level when tested rigorously on deception detection tasks. The feeling of confidence in a judgment isn't correlated with the accuracy of that judgment in the way that we assume it is. We generate stories that feel coherent. We mistake that coherence for truth. Lisa Feldman Barrett and her constructed emotion theory adds another layer to this, or as she's known in our community, Queen LFB. Emotions aren't things that happen to us and then leak out through our face and our body for trained observers to read. They are constructed by the brain in real time. It's based on prediction, prior experience, and context. Which means, even if you could perfectly read every physical signal from someone, and you can't, you would still be reading the output of a constructed experience, not a fixed internal state that maps neatly onto a behavior. So when a body language commentator looks at 15 seconds of footage, or a mentalist, and then tells you with complete confidence exactly what Trump was thinking and exactly what Xi's stillness reveals about the power balance, they're doing something that the research on human judgment tells us is almost certainly wrong. Not because they're lying, bear in mind. It's just because the brain generates plausible sounding explanations with extraordinary fluency. And then we mistake that fluency for accuracy almost every time. Now, this isn't nihilism. I'm not saying that the field is useless. I'm saying the field is real. And the version of it that gets broadcast as entertainment is not that field. They share the same vocab. But that's really where the similarity ends. After all of that, and I appreciate that was a lot, here is what I think the evidence actually supports. Carefully, with the appropriate qualifications, an honest read. Number one, Trump's approach to this interaction was meaningfully different from his documented pattern with other world leaders. The absence of the aggressive pull, the slower physical tempo, the warm gesture coupled with the double-handed clasp. Taken together, these represent a departure from his baseline that's really worth taking seriously. Whether it reflects deliberate diplomatic strategy or a genuine shift in how he's reading this specific relationship at this specific moment or something else, I can't say definitively, and nobody else can unless they're part of his team. But something was calibrated differently here. That is an observable fact, not an inference. Number two, Xi's composure is consistent with both his individual baseline in formal ceremonial settings and with the collectivist cultural framework that he's operating within. Reading it as a specific dominance response to Trump requires projecting an internal state onto a behavior that's equally well explained by a cultural context and personal default register. That projection is not justified by the footage alone. Number three, the environment communicated more than the handshake did. Xi's home territory, Xi's staging, Xi's choreography. The power signal, if anything, was in the architecture. It's the military honor guard. It's the construction of the whole event. The handshake is happening inside a frame that was already making a statement. So reading the handshake in isolation really misses the bigger message altogether. 4, the overall interaction carried a warmer register than their entire earlier meetings. Multiple people present noted that the conversation during the ceremony felt more personally engaged than previous encounters. That's consistent with a long relationship in which both parties currently have strong incentives to present a collaborative posture publicly. Whatever the private negotiating reality is, who knows? But that observation is worth holding lightly. It's not an insight into either man's genuine intentions. That's the honest read. You're welcome to push back on it. I would love you to. That's the point of an honest discussion. If you have some kind of reading or insight or information that will help grow this reading for me and for everyone, I want to hear about it. Because I only know what I know at the end of the day. I can't consume everything. That's what these kinds of discussions are for. The gap I mentioned at the start between what this kind of content claims and what the science supports. You've just seen a live example of it. Confident conclusions drawn from a single behaviour with no baseline, no cultural context, no acknowledgement of competing explanations, and no honesty about the limits of inference. That's the standard that it's become. Now you can see when that happens. Now the frameworks we used. Hofstede's individualism collectivism dimension and the concept of Mienza for the cultural context. Parakinesics and movement quality as a more reliable signal than gesture shape. And Robert Plutchik's intensity model for mapping observable behavior onto emotional states without overclaiming. And then Barrett's constructed emotion theory for understanding why confident emotion reading from body language is a lot harder than it looks. And we've got Kahneman's work on why confident judgment and accurate judgments are not the same. Irving Goffman's framing of social performance for understanding that diplomatic interactions are never candid moments. Now, none of these are obscure. All of them are in the literature. The fact that most body language content doesn't reference them is not an oversight. It's largely the appeal to the sexier biases. So here's the practical thing I want to try and leave you with, if nothing else. Before you make a judgment about what someone's behavior means, ask yourself 3 questions. What is the context, including the cultural context? What is this person's baseline? And what are the other possible explanations for what I've just observed? If you can't answer all 3, you don't have an analysis, you have a first impression. First impressions are data, they're not conclusions. Malcolm Gladwell, I think, if he's honest, would tell you that as well. The skill is in knowing which one you're working with. I've been lucky enough to be working with this kind of stuff for a decade. The reason that we're doing this is because what we're not just me and a bunch of other people are teaching in rooms, and what most people pick up from this category of content on YouTube are so different that the gap feels like a problem worth addressing directly because it influences the perception around what can and cannot be done. If this episode feels slower or more complicated and less satisfying, or you want a point made earlier than some kind of clean, confident verdict, that is on purpose. Because accuracy is slower and more complicated than a headline. The skill is in learning to stay with that. So every source cited in this video, I'll put it in the description. Check them out. The method of reaching whatever information I, or we, or anyone else does. That's what I'll defend. The conclusions are always up for debate because new information will come in and change that. So if this is the kind of analysis that you've been looking for, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get updated when new episodes are dropping. And they are coming soon. So I'll see you in the next one.